there's nothing that God cannot do. Jesus made that statement, and he called him Abba Father. It means Papa or Daddy. It's an affectionate term because Jesus had a close relationship with his Father. This wasn't the first time he talked to him. He didn't have to say, remember me, my name is Jesus. He was in constant communication with the Father. And that's how God encourages us to be, constantly communicating with the Father. Jesus knew his time was short, and he cried out one more time. And he said, Lord, if it's possible, remove this cup from me. I don't want to die on the cross. I don't want to feel the pain of the nails, or the whip on my back, or the crown of thorns on my head, or the mocking and the spitting and the slapping. I don't want to go through this. But not my will. Not what I want, but your will be done. And I have to thank God for that prayer. That was a prayer of submission. Now, he prayed it once. When he came back, and what were the disciples doing?
Sleeping.
They were sleeping. And he went forward. And he prayed. And I believe he prayed intensely, emotionally, however you want to look at it. And he cried out to God, and he repeated those same words. And he came back a second time, and his friends were sleeping. And he woke them up, and he said, pray with me. Pray with me. This is so important. Pray with me. How many of you are on the prayer chain? Those calls come through, and somebody says it's my mother, or my sister, or my baby. Would you pray? And I believe the people in this church family pray as though it was their mother and their sister. They take it intensely to heart, and they begin to pray and intercede. That's the value of a prayer chain. It's not a gossip chain. It's a prayer chain to touch God with needs. And almost immediately, people all around are standing in the gap and interceding for each other. That's what Jesus needed from his friends that night. But he prayed that prayer, that lonely prayer of submission. And he said, Lord, not my will, but your will be done.
Amen.
Third time, he moved forward again away from Peter, James, and John. He laid himself down on that ground, and he began to pray and to cry out to his Father. And a third time, he said, if it's possible, and anything's possible with you, if there's any other way that mankind can be saved other than this, please do it.
Amen.
But if not, your will be done. Your will be done. 3 times. It's a prayer of submission. It's a prayer of sacrifice. You see, the battle was won in the garden. When Jesus left the garden, he left ready for God's will. He didn't change God's plan, but he submitted his heart to God's plan. And sometimes we make a mistake with prayer. And we think, I'm going to pray and tell God what he needs to do. I'm going to pray and give him a good idea of how things ought to go. And let me tell you, God's already got it all worked out. He's already got a plan. Prayer is bringing us into submission with the will of God. I've heard people say, if you pray and then you say, God's will be done, that's because you don't have faith. And I say, oh, no, it's not. How did Jesus pray? He prayed, your will be done. I encourage you, whatever area you're praying in, whether it's for your family or yourself or your job, pray God's will. Not my will, but God's will be done. You see, there was no more struggle. He'd won the battle in the garden. And when he got up and he went with the soldiers, they didn't have to fight him. He submitted because it was the will of God. The last thing I want to talk about tonight is Gethsemane betrayal. Judas had already received the money. He'd already purposed in his heart to turn Jesus over to them. Now, I want to tell you that these soldiers with their clubs and their swords, they knew what Jesus looked like. They knew which one he was. They'd heard him preach. They'd seen him teach. They saw the miracles he was.
Amen.
But yet Judas said, I'll take that money. I'll betray him. And that's what he did. He betrayed him with a kiss. And the soldiers stepped forward with their clubs and their swords, and the disciples ran away. Those friends that he counted on to pray with him abandoned him.
Right.
Let me tell you, it didn't surprise Jesus. He knew that would happen. That was prophecy from the Old Testament being fulfilled. And they ran and they left him. One ran away in what condition? Do you remember?
Naked.
Yes, that's embarrassing for him. The religious people sent out the soldiers in the nighttime. They're carrying torches, and they're carrying clubs, and they're carrying swords, as though they're going to arrest a criminal. And instead, they make the biggest mistake ever made by them. They arrested the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And God's will was done that night. And I want to say, Jesus allowed it.
Amen.
He allowed it to happen because of the prayer of submission. He said, your will be done. You see, all he had to do was speak a word, and the angels would have rescued him. But he had submitted his will to the will of the Father. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a strong-willed person. Are you? How many of you would say you were a strong-willed child? You grew up to be a strong-willed adult. And you've been living by your own choices and your own will for a long time. I want to tell you, tonight's the night to find that place of prayer and say, not my will anymore, Lord. I've messed it up enough on my own, not my will. But God's will be done in my life. God's will be done in my family. You see, we all face Gethsemane moments. We all have times when we need to come to the cross and we need to say, not my will, but yours be done. God's glory is more important than your comfort. God's glory is more important than your ideas. It's all about Him. He laid it all down for us, didn't He? He gave His life for us. Tonight He's saying, I'm speaking to your hearts. And there are things that you need to submit in prayer tonight. Maybe you have friends that have failed you. So did He. Maybe you even had friends or family who betrayed you. So did He. He knows how you feel. And He's the one that can heal those hurts. Jerry, thank you for sharing tonight. That forgiveness will set you free. You can't change the choices your father made, but you can give it to Jesus and receive that peace and that freedom that comes. Tonight, in just a few minutes, I'm going to call you to prayer. I want to thank Paul and Sue Youngblood for making the kneeling cushions. Would that be a good word? Because you can kneel in relative comfort if you're the first to the altar. If you're not, kneel anywhere you want. Well, let me tell you tonight, you want victory. You see, Jesus dying on the cross wasn't failure, it was victory. He accomplished the will of God, and we're saved because of that. Sometimes we have people we love, and we say, oh, I want them saved. But we want them saved according to our agenda. We need to say your will be done, and if that means pain for me so that they'll be saved, that's walking the path Jesus walked. Your will be done. Would you stand with me tonight? I'm just going to play something appropriate on the piano because she always does. And I'm going to say to you, if God's speaking to your heart, don't hesitate, don't wait for us to sing. I'm opening these altars for prayer, and if God's speaking to you, and you have something that you need to submit to Him tonight, come now and find a place to pray. I'm going to ask Pastor Ken, some of you, if you would come and pray with these at the altar. Mike Culbertson, if you'd come pray. Cliff Carver, if you would come pray. Chris Finnestadt, would you come?